So today's topic is Epiphany. And in the church, we actually refer to Epiphany by two different names. Epiphany is one, and who can tell me what the other name for the holiday is? Theophany, good. Do you know the difference between the two words? Anybody? We're just going to kind of start there today. So the word Epiphany is a revelation. And the feast getting its name for that comes from the hymn, Epiphany Simeron, your appearance today. So it comes from the actual hymn of the day. We get the name of the feast, Epiphany. The other name, which is actually you could say the more appropriate name, the more correct name, is Theophany, which is not just any old appearance, but the revelation of God. And in the ancient church, it was the first celebration of the God revealing himself to the world. At the historical event of Christ's baptism in the Jordan, when he's baptized, the voice from heaven says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." So that ushers in the global revelation of God, specifically in Trinity, because the dove flew down representing the Holy Spirit, and the Son was there, and the voice came down from heaven. And the hymn for Epiphany, it references all three of those people of the Holy Trinity. So the feast itself, although historically represents the baptism of Christ in the Jordan, the importance of its name is that God is revealed to the entire world. In fact, for the first few hundred years, Christmas wasn't even celebrated. Because as we know from scriptures, the actual birth of Christ took place in secret, with the exception of the angels and a few shepherds. Epiphany was the bigger celebration. And then we added on, of course, we have Christmas, as Father Samson spoke about last week. But this great feast is linked to Christmas in the church. And one of the things you see, I don't think Father Samson, I can't remember if Father Samson spoke about it last week, but in the celebration of Christmas, there's a hymn that the people sing, which says, "We celebrate your nativity, show us also your theophany." And there's a beautiful linking there of the two feasts, because you can't have theophany until you have Christmas. And liturgically, if you're paying attention on the royal hours of Christmas, there's a special service, we also do it for Epiphany, called the royal hours. And they're only done 3 times a year, for Christmas, Epiphany, and in the morning of Holy and Great Friday. And that should tell you something. When certain traditions are limited to just a few things, that shows you the importance of those days in the church calendar. And in each one of those days, Christmas and Epiphany linked. And then on Holy Friday, we sing, starting for us Thursday night, but it's really Holy Friday already. We sing, if you remember when we carry the cross around, we venerate your crucifixion, show us also your resurrection. So in that exact same linking tradition of the crucifixion to the resurrection, you cannot have one without the other. Now we have Christmas linked with Theophany. You cannot have one without the other. And that is also why after Christmas, fasting is forbidden. starting on Christmas Day, going all the way through and including January 4th, fasting is forbidden. Not just optional, but forbidden. And then January 5th is a strict fast day, preparing for the feast of God's revelation of himself to the people. So it's a beautiful, when you see the services the church chooses to include in the celebrations, you really get a beautiful picture of the importance and of the, I'm losing the word right now, so we'll have to sit with importance. The profoundness, maybe that's a better word, for the feast. Because we cannot discover God on our own. We can't study him into our hearts, into our minds. We have to he has to reveal himself to us. And so this great feast of Theophany, God has chosen to reveal himself to the entire world. We celebrate that day because historically it was the baptism of Christ. We celebrate that day with what's called the Great Blessing of the Waters. And that tradition has a little bit of mythology to it that I want to correct. Many of us, and you raise your hand if this happened with you, many of us grew up thinking that the water on January 5th was different from the holy water on January 6th. Many of us grew up thinking that one was for drinking and one was for sprinkling houses. And so, I don't know if anyone's ever heard that the services of the blessing of the waters on January 5th and January 6th were different. They are not different. They are the exact same blessing. It's called the Great Blessing of the Waters, and it is only done at Epiphany every year. The blessing of the waters that we do every month in the church, we just did it a few days ago, is the small blessing of the waters. It does not have all the same prayers as the blessing of the waters for Epiphany. So you might ask, well, why are there two blessings then? Anyone want to gander an answer of why there are two blessings at Epiphany? If the water isn't different, why two blessings? Anybody? I didn't hear you. What? You're talking to yourself. As long as you don't answer yourself, it's okay.
He was in the water physically, but in other way, he was remembering.
That's not quite, he was in the water. We'll talk about that in a moment, about Christ being in the water. Well, think of the other feast days like Pascha. We celebrate what we call the Mikri Anastasi, the Proti Anastasi, Saturday morning. And what do we have? Divine Liturgy and Holy Communion. And we go again on midnight and we celebrate the resurrection again. And what do we have? Divine Liturgy and Holy Communion. These great celebrations, we do the same thing at Christmas. Christmas Eve in the morning, we begin celebrating Christmas and we have Divine Liturgy. So in that sense of the great celebration, the church says, let's bless the water both times. And it's also practical. Not everybody can come on one day. So some people can come on the 5th, some people can come on the 6th, but liturgically, blessing-wise, it is the exact same water. So if anyone is ever, you hear anyone say, oh, no, you can't drink that, that's from, no, it's the same water. We can always drink holy water. So let's talk now about the historic event of Epiphany. Christ entering the water. And this is why this is such a significant event for us, because when Christ entered the water at Epiphany, he was not changed. The water was changed. And when he enters the river, for those of us who remember our earth science class, that river, from there, his blessing goes out into all the universe. And actually, the hymn includes the words, to all the universe. Because that water in the Jordan River, as soon as Christ entered it, it accepted and became holy. And then that river, where does it go? It flows, it evaporates, it rains, and that water circulates the entire globe. And what are we? 90-something% water. So when Christ entered the water and was baptized, it wasn't so that he could be blessed. Now, when we're baptized, we are the ones who are blessed. But when Christ was baptized at Epiphany, the water was blessed. And through that water, the entire universe, including the fishes and the birds and the bears. Okay? So that's an important thing when we celebrate Epiphany. And we here in Tarpon Springs have one of the greatest, if not the greatest, celebration of Epiphany in the world. It's definitely one, if not the largest. And we take the holy water that we bless here in the church, and we take it down to the bayou, and we pour it in the bayou. And what happens now to the bayou? The bayou becomes blessed, and the bayou leads to the river, and the river leads to St. Joseph Sound, which leads to the Gulf of Mexico, which leads to the Atlantic Ocean, which circulates the entire globe. So when we, our little family of Tarpon Springs, when we celebrate Epiphany, just as the original Epiphany blessed the entire universe, our Epiphany blesses all of the area. And we like to remind people that it's our way of asking God to bless all of Tampa Bay and all of the Gulf area. And that particular, so this is that tradition, you know, we have the diving for the cross. It's not a sporting event, right? It's not some kind of Olympic event. It's a blessing. And so just as, I want you to pay attention this year for Epiphany, when the Archbishop takes the cross and he dips it into the holy water font, he's blessing the water with that cross. So when he takes the cross and he goes to Spring Bayou, and he throws the cross in Spring Bayou, he's blessing the bayou. And after 113 times, if the boys didn't get the cross and bring it back to him, there'd be a pile of crosses in the bottom of Spring Bayou. Someone has to bring the cross back to the bishop. Why? So we can bless it again year after year after year. So that's how we celebrate Epiphany. In the ancient church, it was a day of baptism for people. There were only a few days throughout the year that people were baptized in the ancient church. You couldn't just call up the church and say, I want to be baptized next week. There were certain days allowed for baptism, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more. We did it last year, we talked about baptism as part of our sacrament series, but this was one of those days. Now it's the opposite. Now we don't do baptisms on the day of Epiphany because the attention is given to Christ's baptism and his revelation of his divinity to the entire world, the entire universe. Questions? I don't even know what time it is. Questions? Quarter till. Yes. Oh, that's a wonderful question. How long does the blessing last? If you'll notice on the holy water bottle, there's no expiration date. Holy water, and actually they've done tests on this, holy water does not go bad. Other water can go rancid, but holy water will not go rancid, so it does not expire. We are continually asking God's blessings. So we do it, first of all, because we're drinking it on a regular basis, but then also Epiphany ushers in the house blessing season. So we bless the waters at Epiphany, and then Father Samson and I take that water and we go into the people's homes and we bless people's homes every year in January and February. So it's an annual rededication, as it were. I like to call it the maintenance blessing program, right? When your house is brand new, it's a different service. But then every year at Epiphany, because the priest brings the water from the great blessing of the waters, and he blesses our homes, okay? And that's done annually to ask God to continue to bless our homes. Because we're not blessed just once. We don't receive communion just once. We don't cross ourselves just once. We don't come to church just once. We are only baptized once. But everything else in our life, and only one marriage, sometimes two, depending, but that's not the ideal, we know that, but it happens, unfortunately. But the blessings, we always asking God to bless us and to rejuvenate, if that's a good word. John, you had a question in the back. All right, so that's a good question. The people who were baptized before Christ. So the baptism of John is not the same as our baptism, okay? The Jewish baptism was a ritual baptism for cleansing, for forgiveness. Our baptism is something different. So Christ, one of the things that is the truth of Christ's ministry on earth is he took what was old and renewed it. So Christ participates in all of the Jewish life, but he renews it every step of the way. So he was brought to the temple at 40 days, just like all the other little boys were. But he renews it because now he's the King of Kings entering into his house. He was baptized, but now he renews baptism. In the person of Christ, he makes new all of those old sacramental practices of the Jewish life. Does that make sense? Yes.
What is the timeline of prayers that are read at the ceremony of the spring body? And I wanted to know where in the service, when you're at the body, is the holy water inserted?
Okay, that's a good question. So practically speaking, for the way we celebrate Epiphany, at the end of liturgy, we have the great blessing of the waters. That service never ends. It is transferred to the bayou. And the key is you don't hear the clergy say in Greek, Theophany, through the prayers of the Holy Fathers. We don't do that in the church. We do that at the bayou when everything is finished. So the service at the bayou is a continuation of what had started here in the church. So at the end of the blessing, we sprinkle the church, and then we take in a beautiful procession, which is our tradition, we take the holy water, and we take the gospel, and we take the cross, and we make a beautiful procession to the bayou, to then we add another prayer down there, we read the gospel again. That is part of our particular tradition. And then the water goes in, the cross gets thrown, and the boys jump. But it is an extension of what happens here. Then, at the end of that ceremony, that's when the clergy finish the liturgy and that's when the clergy say the final prayer. So it's one extension. So if you're participating in the procession at Epiphany, it's a sacred moment. It is not just, caffeinion time to go out and have a cigarette as we're making our way down to the bayou. It is still a beautiful sacred moment, a continuation of the divine liturgy.